Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. A few details about this podcast before we get started. Details about this podcast episode and more can be found at zachbitter.com. My website is where you can find all details about the podcast, including episode notes, links, timestamps, and a full transcript. You can also find my social media channels and newsletter sign up there. If you want to support the show and also gain access to an intro and ad-free audio version of every episode, as well as early release, consider joining the show Patreon page. You can also access my coaching services, which include my virtual group coaching package, products that I use, my Amazon storefront, which highlights a wide range of training and racing items that I use. Please consider sharing episodes you like on social media, liking, commenting, and writing a review. It really goes a long way in reaching new listeners. As a way to thank listeners who engage, I am raffling a 30-minute consultation with me every month for anyone who shares, leaves comments, and reviews the podcast. Just remember to tag me or send an email to hpopodcast@gmail.com to let me know if I'm not already tagged so I can add you to the raffle. Also, if you have suggestions for show topics or guests, you can also send those to that email address as well. I actually have a little bit of catch up to do with the raffle, so we have two winners. One is Killian Korth, who shared on Instagram stories, and Josh on X. Thanks, guys. I will reach out to you for your free consults. Finally, a big thanks to S Fuels, John G, Delta G Ketones, and Element Electrolytes for sponsoring this podcast. Links and discounts to these brands can be found in the show notes as well as at zachbitter.com. I also left a more formal description of each of these brands at the end of the episode. I'll also quick add, S Fuels currently has a short time discount for 40% off with promo code ZACH40, that's ZACH40. All right, let's get into the show. All right, everyone. I am really excited to be kicking off a series of podcast episodes where I'm going to dive into some of the tribal endurance feats that our world has seen over its existence. And to do so, I'm going to pick some groups of people that have showed some, what many will consider superhuman accomplishments with endurance in order to go about their lifestyles. In order to make this podcast series a little more entertaining for you all, I actually have brought in a co-host for at least some of the episodes, and it's my good friend James Pieratt. For those of you who've listened to the podcast consistently, you probably remember James was on for episode 395, where we dove into his lifestyle a bit. He's a really interesting guy. He's the man behind Wild Hunt Conditioning. Earlier in his life, he actually hit rock bottom with a heroin addiction that landed him in prison. But from there, he took control of his life and since has accomplished some amazing feats, including running 500 miles, deadlifting 550 pounds, became proficient in jiu-jitsu. James also has a really big passion for backcountry hunting and comes from a lineage of bear hunters and has a passionate interest in tribal endurance. So James has used all these skills to better his ability to navigate the backcountry and really chase some of his passions. So I thought he'd be a great co-host to help me go over some of these topics. So for our first group that we're going to take a peek at, the marathon monks. So we'll go over some of the data behind that in the podcast episode, so I won't spoil any of that, but we kind of kick things off by catching up. We jump into the marathon monks, give our thoughts on some of their achievements and how otherworldly they tend to be at times, and also weave in some of the stuff that I think the ultramarathon world has learned or done that maybe comes semi-close to what the marathon monks have done. Either way, throw this one on for your next long run or sit back and listen as James and I dive into some incredible endurance feats.
And the training, the minimal training that I've done for this, for FADOX coming up in a few weeks has really it's given me the perspective. I think that it's one of the most interesting events in ultra running, the 24-hour, just like timed race.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's fascinating. I plan on actually doing a lot more. I personally think I'm much more better suited to probably the 48 to 72 range, just being slower and maybe a little bit more durable than, at least having that be my strength leaning more towards my durability than my speed, at least. But I think the 24-hour stuff is really fascinating because it's just in that sweet spot where you really can you can push your body pretty hard for 24 hours. You know what I mean? And,
yeah.
yeah. So I think
you really
No,
can't have a whole lot of downtime at all
yeah,
in like and still kind of hit like your potential or get close to your potential. But then when you get to like 48 hour and beyond, it's like it's almost the expectation then is to like, okay, I'm gonna have to like take a nap maybe or do something other than just continually move
yeah,
in order to make it sustainable. So then I think it sort of gives you a little bit of a different strategy at least. So,
yeah,
um, a lot of people in the timed event world, they'll say that the 48 hour is one of the hardest because you can start kind of because you can get like serious sleep deprivation with that one
yeah.
without really sleeping. Like you can sort of justify maybe not sleeping, although I think what little research we do have on that would suggest a nap in there somewhere is probably optimal, but it's just like yeah, that one is another one where like you hit that second night and it's just
So it's interesting too with these things because it's like it's the longer they go, like the more the passive things play a part. Like, oh hey, like I'm not a good sleeper. Like like if you're
Right.
someone who has a difficult like, whereas I know guys, I'm kind of in the middle, like a little bit of both, but I know guys that can take like hit like it seems like they hit REM sleep in like 8 minutes flat, and then they pop back up and they're like all right, cool, and they're fully awake, fully cognizant. You know what I mean? Whereas other
Hmm.
people toss and turn, and I definitely kind of trained myself to be able to close my eyes and shut off a little bit. And I think even if you can kind of just do some of like the like a Huberman style protocol with non-sleep deep relaxation, anything to just kind of like downregulate the nervous system a little bit, I found helps me a lot with like the multi-day stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that if you had tried anything like that, because I would think maybe
Like,
some breathing techniques or something would be useful to kind of yeah bring things down a bit.
yeah, basic Wim Hof, just a 10-minute cycle that you can get on YouTube for free. It's like, he has it out there for anyone. And that was just the basic thing I taught myself going. I got really into it before the Pacific Crest Trail, before the Oregon State Run.
Hmm.
And just thinking that it would probably help because for me in the past, that's been an issue with just like the CNS stimulation. I'm kind of a restless person in general. And
Hmm.
so in the past with the multi-day stuff, I bet, you get like a little shaky, and so I put a decent amount of attention into the breath work to regulate, the breath work to maintain regularly, but also just monitor, like never letting my heart rate run away, and really just trying to kind of keep things at like right around 130, 140 if I'm dealing with like some heavy incline or something. But it's like if I start to climb up over that, I slow my pace. Like, I maybe get some more hydration and some carbs in for a sec, use that time to troubleshoot. So I'm not just like sitting there leaking energy or leaking time. And then I get back to moving. But it's like on the 20, like the short, like 100 miles, like I don't really measure my heart rate at all. I just kind of push it because I know like, hey, it's going to be fine. It's only 24 hours, you know what I mean? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, but over the multiple days, I noticed I can't really get away with that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. How things going for Fat Ox? You feeling good about
Good,
it?
good. I am. Yeah. So basically just kind of, I had an 8 hour run on concrete last week, and the feet and knees felt good. A little tightness in the old torn meniscus the next day, but like no acute issues or anything. And it was also just a cold day. Today I have a pre-fatiguing lower body strength session, and then tomorrow and the next day I'll do 5 hour runs. And then that's about it. It'll be just over 2 weeks from right about there. So that'll be my deload from there, where I'll just kind of work some accessories and do some base runs and stick to the program, the same program we ran last time when you helped me with the last 100 mile, my first 100 miler technically, organized race, which was a lot of fun, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. You did that between last time we chatted, I think. So
Yeah,
yeah, you've
yeah,
been
yeah.
busy.
Yeah, no, that kind of gave me the bug too to do more organized events.
Mhm.
And so now I'm becoming, I guess, I am officially what I guess you would call like a serial training race guy who's
Yeah.
just like, I'm using these events, yeah, because like I got so obviously my bread and butter would be the more wilderness stuff, but actually next spring, I haven't announced this yet. This will be the first time I've talked about it, but I'm going to take a swing at 1,000 miles
Oh
up the
wow.
California coast. So it'll be nice and slow, but we're looking ideally to just like hold to an average of like 35 to 40 miles a day for about a month.
Okay.
And work up the coast with minimal support, team shadowing, but I will have to carry a decent amount of stuff too. So we're going to see. I think the actual according to the state of California, like the FKT for that route, I just found out was like 44 days. So
Okay.
if things are, feeling good, it's a newer route and it's pretty broken up, but things are feeling good. I might, who knows where we end up with that. We might make a crack at that.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, when
So
you get into the
anyway,
world of 1,000 mile races, then yeah, typical ultras are training sessions.
it's crazy. I'm just not, like I said, I never really considered it, but then like I just love that was actually one thing I one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on because I know you were planning at like a transcontinental run at like was it a
Yeah.
year or two ago? Yeah. So like at some point I'll we can get into that, but I'm just curious on some of the things that you were looking at as far as like likely problem areas that you were trying to preempt or prepare for, and then any just
Hmm.
logistical things that you found that you were curious about. Because it's a pretty small world. I've been doing some research, and it's like there's not a lot of races or people. Especially I guess it used to be a little bit more common, and now it's less so. But I did see that the world record for a 1,000 mile run is 10 days and about 10 days and 10 hours, which is just, there's something nutty
Yeah.
about like holding my best 100 mile pace for 10 days straight, basically. So, you know,
Yeah. That one's stout. It is interesting. Like, I think we're getting a little bit more momentum on like the longer multi-day type stuff over the last couple of years. It's definitely a spot that's growing a bit as the sport grows, which is cool to see because like yeah, there's a lot of history in that in those like the transcon. Like I don't think people realize how far back some of that stuff goes where, they're doing ultras in Madison Square Garden in the
yep.
1800s and all that
Oh, yeah.
stuff. And a lot of it was the longer haul stuff originally too. That was the more popular.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, unfortunately for my Transcon effort, I got injured before the start, and that's why I wasn't able to do it. And I've waited to put it back on the calendar just because I think there's some things I could probably do better in hindsight. And one of those is doing some like multi-day things that aren't going to be as long as, if everything went perfect for me in the Transcon, I'm still looking at like 6 weeks. So, it's a healthy amount of time to be out there. And yeah, I think I could probably learn something from some stuff, some intermediate distances between what I have done in that. And but yeah, but when I was getting ready to do that, there was I did a bunch of podcast episodes with people who've done either transcon or similar type things. And then after that, I've always kind of tried to keep my finger on the pulse of when people are doing stuff like that. So I've had Christian Morgan has been on a couple times. He used to have the southbound Appalachian Trail record. It actually just got broken by Tara Dower.
Tara. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, she crushed. It was like 40 days or something like that.
Insane.
Uh, yeah, and I think she I haven't unpacked the data from it yet, but I did a podcast episode with another guy who does a lot of ultra content stuff, Joe Corcione, and he was saying that it looked like at least on her Strava that she sort of like negative split it where she was like just hauling at the end.
Yeah.
And there's a couple like two things every time I've talked to these people that they've told me are like just like that just it seemed like everyone had this message was those first few days are really rough because you kind of have that like gradual descent and you can kind of tell like day two is worse than day one, day three is worse than day two, and it's really hard psychologically to kind of get in to not get into this mindset of like, especially if you have something as long as like a transcon or 1,000 miles of like, okay, it's gonna just like linearly digress from here,
Yeah.
and you're already kind of getting to this pretty low point and you start kind of having a hard time wrapping around about how it could get much worse. But then it sort of kind of like normalizes and then you sort of start feeling a little bit better. And you're not going to feel amazing at any point at there, but you're going to feel like, okay, I can start wrapping my head around keeping doing this because it's not like one day's worse than the next any longer.
Yeah.
So you get like this like few days to kind of like just get your body sort of like used to like this is like not the scientific way to think about it, but it's like you can almost shock your body into thinking like, okay, well, this isn't ending, like might as well get comfortable. It's the way the experience kind of sounds to me when they tell it. So
So I will have a benefit in that regard because I didn't know any of this, didn't know expect any of this when I did the 500-mile run across Oregon.
Mhm.
And at the time, in retrospect, I was not ready, prepared, or like I was way ambitious. And I paid some serious prices along the way for that. But I basically my first 3 days, I barely eked out a marathon each day. I like
Okay.
just my biorhythms, nothing was there. I wasn't used to the elevation. I had to adjust my water ratios. I had to adjust like some small things with my electrolytes, but I just hadn't found my rhythm. I didn't feel like myself. I didn't feel like I felt the day before I was about to start, when I was confident and dialed in and sure I was just going to crush this and, develop a
Hmm.
57 mile a day pace and just hold it all the way through nice and clean. I
Yeah.
didn't feel like that guy. And it messed with my head a bit for the first 3 days. Now, in retrospect, I know like the elevation played a part, like magnified that too some, 'cause it just makes you feel a little off if you go up 6,000 feet in a day
Yeah.
and then just start to run. But that was the thing. And the way I describe it to people is, the longer you're out, essentially it's like a reverse, or what would they call it? I believe the academic, an inverse relationship between like the state of your body and the state of your mind. So I
Yeah.
started out, and my body on paper like felt great, and my mind was like, I didn't feel good. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't have energy. And then the longer we went, the better my mind felt. The more I was finding my groove. The more I was like getting used to everything. But then like my joints, the muscles, the more that degraded. So it was just like, this like constant. And by the end, I felt amazing, like a quasi sense of like meditative enlightenment. But my body was messed. I think at the end we counted like 8 legitimate injuries, like it's like
Oh, wow.
ankle sprains, torn ligament in the finger from a fall, like just all these little things. And like
Hmm.
not one of them was devastating or enough to like stop me from running, just to slow me down. And then that was the only time in my life I've had like a real bad blister, to the point that it actually my entire toe that it was on got infected down to the root. And
Mm.
it was like, yeah, it was like an actually infected toe. But that was, again, just like it all seems so far away. And it was a trip, and I'd experienced that before. you know uh Running, well, especially running races I wasn't quite prepared for, running distances I wasn't quite prepared for. But that magnified it considerably. So I am expecting that on a greater scale in this next one for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. The other thing that I heard a lot was, and maybe this was just because I asked this question to pretty much everyone, was just like what they were doing from like a fueling standpoint
Yep.
and how their body was sort of keeping up with stuff. And the folks that were able to kind of more or less maintain weight or come close to it, I think it's probably a tall task to try to maintain weight on a for
Yeah.
Transcon or something like that. But
Right.
there'd be stores people losing 20 plus pounds, and then other ones where people were losing like 2 or 3,
Yeah.
and like even to the degree where I think it might have been Dean Karnassus who he's done it at least twice, maybe more. And he's had both experiences where one, he lost a bunch of weight, and the other, he tried to maintain. And I think another time he even went in like a fair bit overweight, just
Yeah.
preempting that a little bit.
Yeah. I've
And
done that.
yeah, and the ones that were able to kind of maintain or stay closer to kind of their typical weight uh tended to bounce, like feel a little bit better at the end and then bounce back a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So
That
like
makes
they
sense.
didn't have this huge like tail effect of like, I feel miserable for the next few months. And then, you hear stories of people never really getting back to normal after some of that
Yeah.
stuff too, because it's just a little bit of a harsh project to take
Yeah.
on.
It is. And I noticed I mean, from speaking just personally, I noticed my hormones recover, like that scent, or, even whether I get them tested or not, that scent, all the biomarkers, the energy, the mental clarity, all that.
Hmm.
As they say, like the way to measure these things in simple terms, I learned this from a rugby coach. I like it. Is like you can kind of track or you can see if your hormones are recovering healthily after like like a massive bout of exertion, a peak training, playoffs, series of games, a head injury, an ultramarathon, whatever, by like 3 things: are you hungry, are you happy, and are you horny? Like, are these things
Yeah.
like existing in healthy balance with each other? And if the answer is yes, like you probably don't need to like make any drastic changes. And the answer is no, you should probably like look closer with blood work and kind of see what's going on there. So
Hmm.
I've kind of tell my athletes, especially, as the one that we kind of, most of us dabble across ultra endurance and strength, and often sometimes martial arts too. So it's like sometimes the inputs are very different, and you're not tracking the same A equals B as you would like if you're training
Hmm.
one thing, and like it has like powerlifting has telltale signs of burnout. Ultra running does. And then there's like just the general central nervous system stuff. But it's like, point being, it's good to pay attention to this stuff, and that's an easy guide to go by.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably just a good practice to kind of keeping your mind in terms of just kind of assessing your day-to-day state of recovery when you're in big training blocks and things like that too, where you start seeing that stuff not check off for periods of time that are more than acute, then
Right.
yeah, probably worth making some adjustments so you got that kind of stress recovery balance done right.
It is, and I pay attention to it specifically because I'm prone to depression following events. Like not like nothing overwhelming or dramatic, but like being in like a pretty consistent depressive state. Like I love I love what we do. I love what you feel when you're 70 and 80 miles into a 100-mile race, or when you're
Yeah.
running across a state or whatever. Like I love it, and I never feel more like myself or more present and free than when I'm doing that. And so I sometimes find it a bit jarring to come back to normal life immediately after, especially when it's like 24 hours later, you're standing in line at the Safeway buying a rotisserie chicken, and you're like, oh, like, you know what I mean? I
I
thought I
didn't do
was
anything to
suicide.
earn this. Yeah.
I know exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so I have, but now I know enough to plan for it, and kind of, basically I mean, not that this is, everyone has their own recipe, but for me, I find just getting really into creative stuff right after, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
planning, I started writing my new book that actually in doing so, I found some really cool, relevant information relevant to the marathon monks that we'll get to. But like,
Mhm.
something like that to kind of still flex a different muscle, so to speak, something maybe non-physical, but I find that productivity is the best antidepressant outside of just a healthy lifestyle, and for me personally.
Mhm.
And so that's something I generally look to do after an event.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and it is a good transition into the marathon monks, I think. But it's something I think about as the sport gets more professionalized too, where it hasn't been very long where you'd have anybody that was like, "Oh yeah, I'm just like an ultra marathon athlete,"
Yeah.
and I think about just the way I've kind of structured how I've gone about my career, and it's always had other inputs. I mean, for what, even if you count what we're doing right here now, recording a podcast, it's like
Yeah.
you have these other outlets where yeah, after a race or after a big effort and it's time to take some downtime, you're kind of removed from the whole what you described, that kind of like the excitement of chasing and building and then competing and everything that kind of goes into that. Like what are you
Right.
gonna how are you gonna fill that hole when it's not there? And I think that's just good practice too in general, because if you're doing it when you're still actively participating, I mean, there's going to be phases in your life. Some people may run ultra marathons till the day they die. I see these 70 and 80-year-olds out there, so I know some people do it. But, you're going to have different stages of just like your relative competitiveness, or even if you want to keep doing it. So I think like, yeah, putting yourself in a position where you're already like thinking about those things ahead of time, probably a good idea for your mental health.
Agreed. And that reminds me, that last 100-miler I did, the one me and where I met your buddy Nick. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we had a lot of fun. He ended up finishing first in our age division. I got second, although I was like hours and hours behind him. But speaking of that exact race, in that race there was an 81-year-old man,
Yeah.
and he finished. He finished. Yeah, he finished. And I did like we got hit with a really bad heat wave both days, and I was one of the days I was walking with him and just kind of picking his brain on it. He's done like a lot of them. He's been doing them since the 70s, and he's
Hmm.
just kind of like, like why not at this point, I think
Yeah.
he made a joke about tastefully made a joke about like, some of his plumbing not working like it used to, so at least he could still enjoy himself like this. And I was like, fair enough. But I
That's
thought that
funny.
was
I,
cool.
I I can't remember if I told you this, but a couple of years ago at the 100-mile road championships, they have all the age grouping stuff for that. So one year and they have like categories up till like as far as they need to. And one year, like there's the 80 plus category. Usually you show up and finish in the 80 plus category, you're gonna win if when it's the 100-mile road championships, there's just no one else but you there. But there were
Right.
four guys there one year that were between 80 and
Dude,
85, I think. So they had a little
that's awesome.
throwdown. And it came down to the very end, too. I think it was like the guy who won took the lead like in the last mile or so, or it was really close.
Dude.
But so yeah, imagine being fourth in your age group in the 80 plus division at the 100-mile.
Well, imagine being 80 years old, 80 something years old, having lived your whole life, lost a ton of people you love, but got you gone
Yeah.
through all the ups and downs, And then in the last, the last stretch of your life, you get into a showdown over the last mile of 100-mile race with another guy. Like there's
He's in the
something
same
that's,
boat.
dude, it is. That's a movie. Like there's several movies you could make, several directions you could take a movie like that. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
But that's just like that. Tell me that's not an awesome life story, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it
81
definitely
years,
is.
81 years old, and you're getting an ultramarathon gunfight with another, another old mile slinger like you. And I mean, that is cool. That's the guy I want to be.
Right, yeah. They did a story on all four of them leading into the race because obviously you see that on
Yeah.
the sign up and you're like, okay, this is the story to follow for this one. And part of it was like they were asking him like, when was the first 100 mile you did? And it was like, yeah, 1970, like
Yeah.
super old, old events and stuff like that. So,
Well, you'll
but
still,
yeah,
I mean, he's not quite that old, but I'm in Northern California. So it's like you'll still be, the ultra runners will still be out hitting trails around Auburn and stuff here and see the Gordon Ainsley just come by
yeah,
holding a jar of pickle juice and a bologna sandwich, one in each hand. Literally, like he just like haunts the trails like this. And I had this buddy of mine who was having a hell of a time at the Tahoe Rim one year. Like he's lying on the trail, can't get up. It's just legs are shot, elevation, everything. And he looks up and who does he see but Gordon Ainsley, like right there. He goes, son, I ain't never quit a race in my life. And he just keeps shuffling on it, like just a steady 4 mile an hour shuffle. And then my buddy's like, oh my God, I couldn't DNF after that. Like that, how shameful would that have been? And
yeah.
I thought that was the funniest thing.
Is where you start asking, so was that a hallucination or was that
I
Gordy?
know, was that real? But apparently that time it was actually. And who knows, bro? He might just, who knows if he was ever real? He might just be the spirit of us all.
Yeah, I hesitate to sidestep again, but that you reminded me
Yeah.
of another story where John Kelly, this last year at Barclays, so he's finished it now for the third time.
Ah,
Um,
Jesus, man.
yeah, so he's got that one figured out. Like he's just so
Yeah.
good at it,
Yeah.
and he was taking a nap at one point where he found like a rutted out like tire track that was a little cooler, so he like laid down in
Okay.
it
Okay.
and he's lying there and he sees like this guy and his like wife and kids walk by and he like looks at he's kind of half asleep awake half asleep and the guy goes, oh hey, that's John Kelly, and then keeps walking. And then he realized after he woke up, he's like, oh, that was like my high school friend who I hadn't seen in like 2 decades or something like that. And he's like, he thought he was a hallucinating.
Oh,
So, but then
dude,
after the
that's so
race,
funny.
for some reason, after the race, he decided, well, I'm just gonna reach out to him and see, because like, who knows, maybe reached out, just like, oh yeah, we were out there on a hike and we knew the
Oh
race
my
was going
God.
on and we just happened to see you lying there sleeping.
Oh, dude, what are the odds? Like the cosmic butterfly effects involved in that paths crossing.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Uh,
hilarious to think. It's just like, yeah, you're out in the middle of one of the craziest events ever, and some old friend from high school comes by.
would you ever do it?
You know, I probably would. I mean, I say no now just because like I don't have any orienteering skills that would justify getting around the first loop even.
Right,
So
right.
like that would be the biggest hurdle. If I got into learning that stuff, which I would be interested in that if I decided, okay, I spend the time to kind of learn it, then I think I'd get more excited for something like that. But right now, like my only hope on a course like that would be get as fit as I could on really harsh terrain and
Yeah,
just try to follow somebody. And
yeah.
then even if I get super fit and figure it out and get through the first four loops, then I'm gonna get in trouble on that fifth one probably when
So,
you got to go opposite directions
yeah,
and then
yeah.
you're in the situation where you torture yourself for 48 hours and, and DNF.
No payoff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. But then again, like if you ever do get, like it might happen 3 years from now, you might be interested in hunting and have a year or two in the
Yep.
backcountry, and then you already have those skills without having developed those skills.
Yeah, that's the reason I'll never say absolutely no is because I am looking at getting back into hunting here soon. So
Yeah.
that'll be
No,
I did some
I'm in.
whitetail hunting when I was younger in Wisconsin, but once I moved from Wisconsin, I've really disconnected from it. So I'm trying to, figure out a way to kind of get that back into
Yeah.
the rotation.
No, yeah, great whitetail hunting in the Midwest for sure, man. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, so anyway, ultra marathon, I have a way that we can open this because I've discovered in the process of researching my book, which touches on the ultramarathon monks briefly,
Mm-hmm.
but also on some similar tangents. I have discovered a very strange connection that, to my knowledge, no other historian has exposed or discussed. I'll have to double check with my buddy Daniele Bolelli on this, but I believe that we will be the first ones to break this theory, and you can give me your thoughts on it. But
Okay.
okay, so the marathon monks of Mount Hay, excuse me. They, in broad overview, a small group of crazy guys who's been there for somewhere around 900 years, who believes that running ultras or endurance in general is the path to enlightenment. They worship the immovable wisdom king, who's like a extremely terrifying but like justice-based deity that holds like a flaming rope and a sword, and essentially they do nothing but do this all the time. So having established that, very nearby, and unless you're familiar with feudal Japanese geography, which I certainly was not before this, you would not know that the ninja, okay, generally seen as at this point, a pretty cartoonish and, more of a comic book character than like, say, a historical figure. So the ninja were real. They were known as shinobi at the time, and they were essentially just, covert operatives. Like, man, we have Navy SEALs. The feudal times had a ninja, and for reference, it would have been slightly different. It would have been if, like, imagine that the United States, we got all of our Navy SEALs from the states of New Hampshire and Rhode Island. And these two states, their entire economies were essentially built around raising from childhood Navy SEALs and creating them. It would be, so essentially that would be a more accurate parallel, but in essence, they were special forces guys, spies, intelligence operatives, very real. However, they come specifically, the reason I use the states as examples, they come from two regions, the Iga and Koko provinces. And these were remote mountainous areas in Japan. To make a very long and irrelevant story short, essentially they were local peasants and local peasant landowners who formed what they called defense leagues against bandits, invaders, and like tyrannical local samurai lords. In a time when peasants didn't have recourse for such things, so they become lacking the strength, military strength, to conventionally challenge the samurai. They become these shadow warriors. Funny thing is, it brings us back to the ultramarathon monks. They come from basically the same area. In fact, the two strongholds are exactly a 50K apart. They're 31 miles apart. And this is relevant because the ninja have a long history of admiring, venerating, studying directly under monks, because they learned initially as peasants, they learned their skills from a group called the Yamabushi, which just translates to warrior monks. We're just some essentially wandering monks who just practice fighting and praying all day long. And this is where the ninja learned a lot of their, not just their fighting skills and martial arts, but like mountain asceticism, survivalism, all these skills. So here you have literally located right next to each other in a very remote and mountainous and otherwise sparsely populated region of Japan, the marathon monks, and then right next to them you have the shinobi. So this made me just generally curious, like, how is it possible you can live that close to each other and not like have like a history of interaction? And admittedly, I didn't find any evidence of direct interaction between the two, because they're both neither group is very chatty or big on records. And however, what I did find was 3 separate historical examples of ninja from the feudal period covering insane distances on foot. Like nothing magical, not 1,000 miles later he was somewhere overnight, but like a guy who cranked out right around, what was it, 300 miles in like it's like 4.5 or 5 days, something like that. And it was like to carry, and one of these like marathon type things, battle of marathon, to carry an important message, high stakes. And then you start seeing another reference talks about them regularly covering distances of 30 to 70 miles for military operations, scouting. Like one of their main purposes outside of all the other stuff, they were primarily scouts. It was like, how can I go really far, see some things without being seen, and come back?
Mm-hmm.
which means no horses. They weren't, that was a feudal thing anyway, but riding horses is the only other way around at the time, and that's allowed. It's very large, and horses are very finicky. They're not good in mountainous terrain. They need a lot of water, a lot of food, a lot of attention. So it wasn't part of what they did, which means that there's no other way to cover those miles than to cover them on foot. And if you're covering 30 to 70 miles per day, sunrise to sunset time frames, and you're living right next to the marathon monks who are still doing these crazy, covering these crazy amounts of distance through the mountains in similar terrain. It is, I cannot think of a way that those two would not in some way, at least indirectly, be connected, especially when the shinobi have a established and consistent history of studying and learning from monks, the skills that they use to survive. So again, just a theory, but it is fascinating that these two people come from the same area, or these two subcultures come from the same area.
Yeah, it makes you think that there was maybe some sort of like connection point that's just undocumented, because it seems odd that there'd be like two ships in the night between those two groups just passing by
Exactly.
one another like that.
Exactly. And again, it's like, who knows, maybe it was some of these are sparsely documented. Like Japan is great at keeping records. Like to this day, they have some of the oldest companies. I believe the oldest corporation in the world still is in Japan. And it was a construction company that used to build shrines in like the 6th century or something, like something crazy. However, these are two groups who've had like, political opposition, who've been outlawed, who've, had records destroyed, purges, and the warring clans. And so it doesn't, generally there wouldn't be a clear connection left on paper after all this time between these two people. But that's like, again, something I was talking to my buddy Daniele Lilly about, but like a lot of the academic historians get focused on like needing a direct paper trail, even in cultures that didn't have paper trails, and they'll
Right,
accept
yeah.
nothing less. But it's like a lot of times we look at these things logically. So it's like, occasionally you'll hear someone who's never shot a bow discuss like the history of archery and get some like very obvious things wrong, and it's because they're not actually familiar with anything more than the information on the topic. They have no like direct experience to draw from. So sometimes I look at these things just very logically. So it's like you could have, like, for instance, if there was a mountain kingdom anywhere in the world, any period of time, they were good at rucking because it's
Hmm.
physically impossible to do anything effectively in the mountains without being decent at carrying a load on your back, especially if you're a soldier. So it's like something like that you would only know if you've been hunting, you've been to mountains, it's just, there's
Hmm.
no getting around it. And whereas a lot of times these, the people that need these like, direct academic paper trails would look at that and be like, well, I didn't see any written evidence that Alexander the Great really did train his army with rucking, even though Macedon was, a mountainous kingdom, which in this case was
Hmm.
false. We know, at least we know Alexander's father trained his men by loading big bags of flour onto their backs and forcing them to march, to build strength in their legs, moving up hills, rucking, and then potentially like these bags of flour in ancient Greece were up to 100 pounds, so it could have also been used to simulate like carrying wounded comrades and whatnot. But
Hmm.
again, I digress. Point being, like if you look at this objectively, and you got guys, both of these guys can run a 50K in 4 hours or less. So this is a few hours apart by foot in a mountainous remote area where there's not like, this isn't like two people living in Tokyo or two groups in Tokyo. There's nothing there. Like these are intentionally remote mountains. I find it fascinating, especially when you see the Yamabushi connection and the fact that the ninja were like actively seeking out monks to learn things from.
Hmm.
So again, nothing solid, but pretty, there's some possibilities there, but it opens up the conversation on the marathon monks as a whole, because I do not know how these guys don't have their own HBO series and their own,
Yeah.
like CNN's. Like this is it's fascinating. And I initially met them, like I'm a lover. My mom's Japanese, and I'm a huge fan of Japanese culture and history. But I was skeptical when I heard a lot of this stuff too, and then I started peeling back the layers. I'm like, this isn't BS. This isn't like a new age, inflated new age, sensibilities, like, overwhelming historical fact. Like these guys are actually doing these crazy things, and they're actually doing them with some very minimal resources too.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the when I just look at the stats, and maybe I'll just read some of the stats.
I think that'd be
It's
good.
like, it's just they're grand enough, but you can kind of wrap your mind around it if you've been in the ultra running world at least. But then when you add, like you said, the resource side of things, and plus they're not just doing this, they have all sorts of other things going on along the
Hmm.
way. But I mean,
Yep.
for folks that are kind of just coming to this a little bit more fresh, it's the marathon monks, they're known for this 1,000 day challenge where they cover like I think it's like 24,000 miles. And it's essentially this 7 year journey where on year one, they'll take 100 days and go 19 miles each day on this route on Mount Hia. Uh and then that's year one. So I mean, like a lot of runners, a lot of ultra runners, they look like I can wrap my head around that. And
Yeah.
then year two and year three, kind of the same thing, 100 days each, 19-mile route. Then year four and year five, it starts to pick up a little bit where they do 200 days in a row with 19 miles each day. And then this is where I think it starts getting really interesting.
Yeah.
Is you end that one with that 9 day retreat, which is
Oh
involves this
no, they
like
do.
Buddhist deity chant, where I think what is it, 100,000 times they have to chant
Yep.
it. No
Yep.
food, no drink, and they're seated upright with no sleeping. So they
Yep.
actually have people there basically making sure they're doing those things properly.
Yep.
And when you listen to like the accounts of this, it's like the thing they complain about the most is just keeping their head upright. And it's mind-boggling to me just like being able to do anything like that and then finding like what do they actually find the most challenging of it all. But yeah, I mean, you can just imagine the state you would be in that point, just from that
Actually,
alone.
I have one thing that I've heard one of the guys talk about the things that they found most challenging, or one of the
Yeah.
guys secondhand. He was saying it's getting up every night. So the only water they get through the whole evening is that tiny bit of water at midnight. It's the only time they're allowed to move within a 24
Mhm.
hour period is middle of the night. The hardest thing was going to the well every night.
Yeah.
And they talk about each night. The first night, it took the guy, he gets 200 meters, about 200 meters to walk to the well. So it's not very far, right? They're talking about
Mhm.
like the first night it took him like like a couple minutes, and then by the last night it took him like 2 hours to get there. Like he's just so like
Yeah.
so weak and just like like it took and so that apparently that the and then yeah, keeping the heads up, and I guess sometimes they'll like have like other monks meditate on either side so they can't do the tip over if they get not off or whatever. But
Mhm.
apparently from their perspective the hardest thing is getting to the well with the meditation retreat.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that this podcast sponsors include S Fuels. They have a 15% offer for you. Element Electrolytes, they have a free sample pack offer for you. John G Apparel has 10% off, and Delta G Ketones has a 20% off and free consultation offer for you. Links and details can be found in the show notes and the episode landing page. You can also check out a full description at the end of this podcast episode.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do remember hearing about that extended
Yeah.
timeline that it takes
Hmm.
between night to night.
Yeah,
I mean, and then you make it through that, and you have year six, which is now it's 100 days with 34 miles per day. So you're just
dude.
you're upping that, and then year seven, 100 days, 52 miles per day,
Yep,
followed by another 100 days, 18 miles per day.
that's
And
nutty.
yeah, that's where I starts to get a little bit in my mind, like I'm starting to think about like, okay, like that 100 days, 52 miles per day, I can wrap my head around the execution of that, all resources available.
Right.
But and like when everything else is just like when you build your entire life around that existence.
Yep.
But when you look at just like what they're doing, they're not just going out and focusing on moving 52 miles and that's it. They're limiting the amount of food and essentially water they can get. They've got other obligations to do. Their sleep is really, really low. Like
Yeah.
even in the early stages, I think with the 18-mile days or the 19-mile days on year one, they've got like a bunch of other stuff going on, so they're not actually sleeping a ton. And
Yes, they're. I mean, the whole time they're doing this, that's the thing they're doing. Like, they're going to shrines, saying prayers,
Mhm.
like making offerings, like. And I heard. I'm not sure if you heard. There was a European guy who like went over and observed them, and
Mhm.
he was saying that like it seems like even when they're just like hiking, like it seems like they're not moving very fast, but then you try to keep up with them, and they're holding like a 4.5 mile pace the whole time at just like what I mean at a shuffle or a fast hike.
Mhm.
And which I mean covers some ground, but even still like it like you're going to be doing that pretty much all day.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
stop and make offerings, you get a little bit of sleep. The crazy thing to me is that they're averaging three to, like, during the peak days of these challenges, they're averaging 3 to 5 pairs of shoes a day because they're using tatami sandals that are wearing out. So these guys are literally strapping extra sandals to the outside of their packs. They're carrying packs. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
so it's yeah. I mean, before we can get into nutrition after this, because it's a whole other. I mean, whole other thing. But just the fact that you're wearing out 3 to 5 pairs of shoes every single day during a peak challenge, and your only protection from the element isn't, like the fancy ultra windbreaker I like to run in when it's just a tiny bit chilly here,
Yeah.
just like 5 degrees below comfortable. No, they get like a wooden hat. They're only allowed to wear it when it's actually raining too, by the way. Like,
Mhm.
it's not like, oh, like the sun. No, if it's raining, you can put on the wooden hat, and then if it's not, and then just like literally like a basic kimono, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
Nutty.
Yeah. It's definitely not optimized for performance what they're doing,
No,
that's for sure.
no.
It's pretty wild to think about. I mean, it's one of those things where it just makes me wonder, because I think we see this in other disciplines too. I think running and walking is very unique because I think humans are just biologically made to be able to tolerate this at a higher level than a lot of other animals are.
Agreed.
And but even when you look, you'll see people do like rock climbing or just gymnastics and things like that, and you start to recognize how far we've actually removed ourselves on average from what our
Yep.
bodies are really capable of when that's really your only goal is to be able to be able to continuously move through like really harsh environments.
Right.
And every once in a while, you come across a group of people like this, like the marathon monks, where they just did not give that up for one
Yeah.
reason or the other. And we're seeing these feats that we would actually, you take this, we'll get into the nutrition, and this is where I think it gets really wonky is like you take this into any like, Western university exercise physiology lab, nutrition lab, they're just going to say like, yeah, it doesn't compute. Like this
Yeah.
person would be dead. This person would lose an insane amount of weight. And they don't. Well, I'm sure they lose a bunch of weight, but like they're alive. Assuming the ones that make it are alive, I should probably mention that like there is once you get, is it after year? Is it? I think it's after year three. You
After
have
year
to get
three, it's all or
yeah.
nothing after that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's when you
Yeah.
have to kill yourself if you fail, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They bring a rope and a knife, and you're supposed to commit seppuku or maybe hang yourself. But I know the route is littered with skeletons and, like the gravestones of the guys who didn't make it.
hmm Yeah. So I mean, the fact that everyone hasn't failed is insane to me. Like that there's actually
Fascinating.
people. So when you have situations like that too, then I wonder like how many like just sort of freak outliers just get identified through the people who make it versus the people that,
Yeah.
end up on the side of the trail. And it's like, are these just like, is this like just an incredibly like intense, specific, long like timeline version of us selecting like all the LeBron Jameses
Yeah.
or Michael Jordans of the like movement, walking, and
Yeah.
calorie deprivations.
I think
Humans like,
I think for sure that plays a part. I mean, there's no way that something that extreme and physical isn't going to select for people that are, predisposed
unique.
genetically towards it. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, man, I think it's going to be the LeBron Jameses and the Michael Jordans of the mental strength guys, because it's just like 7 years is a long time, man. It's a long time. I mean, like, what it is to turn that switch on and be like, okay, here we go. But like to leave it on for 7 years,
hmm
that's and they're doing it. And like at the running performance side, like I said, they're not like running super fast. They're oftentimes with a walking stick, much like we use trekking poles, and they're just holding that 4.5 mile pace, 3.5 probably to 4.5 mile pace over any terrain, rain or shine. And it's kind of like, I don't know if it's probably been a long time since this happened to you, but maybe when you first started, it's like that woman that you meet in like 100 mile race or any ultra who's like 15 or 20 years older than you and like doesn't appear nearly as athletic as you, and then she just sets like that pace and holds it, and you're like you're just going up and down, and she still like finishes near or ahead of you or whatever. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Like
Uh-huh.
consistency does pay, I guess.
Yep.
So that's what I picture in my mind, having had that happen to me more than once.
Yeah.
That's what I picture in my mind, just some small bald Asian guy just me and my ultras, drinking my glycogen drinks, and with my sun deflecting, cooling windbreaker on, and just getting passed up by some guy at a brisk walk with a walking stick,
In a robe, yeah.
and a robe. Yeah, as he's chanting, he's chanting with it. He's not breathing, he's chanting.
That's when you assume you're hallucinating and you're not actually
Yeah,
seeing that happen. Or that's a way to cope that you didn't just have that experience of him
yeah.
beating
I
you.
would lie to myself. I would lie to myself for sure. Like, that's crazy. I did have
Yeah.
a I did when I was setting the accidentally breaking the weighted run world record. I passed a guy. I passed a guy on a bicycle at sunset on the second day who was riding a mountain bike on a road with he was wearing a leather jacket, and he had a small wiener dog perched on his shoulder like a parrot, who was also wearing a matching leather jacket with little metal studs. Like he was gonna like rob me of my wallet, the little guy.
Yeah.
And that was real. Apparently, the guy, as I walked by, stopped, like turned my head and was like, "What?" And then he had like a special harness, and the thing was like rigged up on his shoulder like a side backpack. And I was like,
Yeah.
"That was real. Oh my god, that was real." And then I just kept going. But it happens. It happens.
Yeah. I
But
mean, the only like Western recent kind of feat that I would put in like a similar ballpark as the 52 miles per day for 100 days is Pete Kostelnick. I don't know if you're familiar with some of his stuff. I mean, he's got the men's Transcon record at 70, it's like 72 and a half miles a day for almost exactly 6 weeks. And I mean, that's a
Jesus.
super impressive thing. That's much more well documented, but he's got something I would consider even more impressive where it was self-established. He called it the Keys to Keys, where he started up in Keys, Alaska, and then worked his way down to Keys, Florida, all
No
self-supported.
way.
Yeah, he had
Oh,
like a running stroller.
dude.
He averaged 50 miles a day doing that. So it
That's
was like,
insane.
yeah, it's a similar structure. Like, I mean, it's basically around 100 days, I think. I'd have to look back at the specifics, but the fact that he was self-supported, obviously he's got a lot more gear available to him and he's
Yeah,
eating
yeah.
a lot more than these guys are. But in
Right.
terms of getting into the realm, like we're at least in the same universe here with something like that. And that's just like kind of far and away the most like insane thing that I've seen done in recent
Agreed.
times where
Agreed.
when you just start thinking of the number of things that could go wrong, especially
So
up in Alaska.
for sure. But the thing about that gets me is his pace, because these guys,
hmm
like, they stack the miles up, but they're moving pretty consistently slow.
hmm
And like for me, at least with me personally, I know like I can move slow pretty much forever. It's when I start moving fast, my fuel starts going down, my injuries start going up, you know what I mean,
hmm
my local fatigue, all these things, which is one reason I pace as a pretty slow moving pace with minimal stops when I'm doing a wilderness ultra. But the fact that you would go keys to keys, averaging 50 miles a day, that's like, I mean, that's what do you think goes into the durability in a human being who can crank out a 50-mile pace, presumably, at a pretty active moving pace or pretty fast moving pace day after day, and not get injured or just break down?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Pete specifically, like he had a series of years where he was logging some insane training where he would do like in the neighborhood of 30 miles per day pretty consistently. So he was hitting like I remember like he started that before like Strava was as popular for runners as it was, and he was a little bit late to Strava, but I remember when he signed up for it, he's like, you guys just wait till you see what I'm doing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Dude,
It's like
quaking in
these
fear.
300-mile training weeks. Yeah.
Jesus.
Uh-huh. So, I
Well,
mean,
that's the
I think
secret.
I think like, I don't know like where the trade-off is there. I think there may be a trade-off in terms of like preparing like that probably puts you in a position where you get so one-dimensional if you can fit your effort of your keys to keys type thing in a window of time you're gonna just do something heroic like that. But I don't
Yeah.
think it's super sustainable. I don't think
No,
you'd
no.
see like that approach working, and then like also that same person is 80 running the
Yeah.
USATF 100-mile road championships. I think those two
No,
things are
I agree.
separated.
I
Your
agree.
approach is actually probably more conducive to becoming an 80-year-old ultra marathon runner,
I'm
where
hoping.
you're doing a lot of different activities. You're staying strong. You're staying durable. It's not one dimensional.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. Like, do you want to put something on the table that hardly anyone, if anyone, will ever replicate? you might have to do what Pete did.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, dude. If I set an FKT next year, that'll be the year after that. Someone else will, it'll be broken by a 19-year-old college girl. That's fine with me. But
Get just
I
enough
just,
attention to it. Yeah.
yeah. No, like I made a really cool running program, and this proved it was legit. So,
Yeah.
no, but for me, it's just like I said, I started running at, was I 31 or 32, and like, I don't have any outwardly competitive aspirations towards it, but inwardly I'm like savagely so, because I expect a constant, like a relentless forward momentum on some aspect. Like life happens and obstacles come up. So you got injuries, you lose loved ones, you got all these things that happen. But taken on the whole, like I prefer to look at life as just one endless chance to kind of evolve across the spectrum.
Mhm.
And I've just been very lucky to find ultra running, and specifically wilderness ultra running, that kind of checked a lot of the boxes I needed, as opposed to like one or two.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what I go in. I'm like, oh, if I can go in and just have a really cool time with, like my crew is all made up of my family and friend, my wife, my friends. And so it's like, with some people that I love, and go out there and just really like do some productive and conductive suffering, and maybe do a cool thing or two for some other people to find value in, accidentally on the process, then that's cool with me.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. And I think like with respect to the marathon monks, it's like I was trying to like my first thought was like trying to get into like what their purpose is with it. And it is one of those things where I think, you have a group of people. Well, maybe I should back up. You have, let's take modern, especially modern Western society, and there's just so much stimulus that is around us that is like you can sort of like you could go your whole life without even asking why am I here? Like
Yeah.
it's that absurd. But then you have like these groups of people like the marathon monks where they really seem to just like have one big question, and that's sort of like transcendence and like what is the meaning of this? Why are we here? And they're just continually pushing their body maybe to like a state where their mind almost is like it sounds almost like they're trying to force themselves into like another like almost spiritual dimension in their mind. So they're like exploring like these different worlds almost with like this sort of activity. Because I can't imagine they're not just like that they're not getting these massive hallucinations and almost these like drug-like euphorias when they're doing these sort of activities.
So you actually nailed it on the head. So one of my closest friends is a Buddhist monk, and he is pretty good friends with one of the guys who's he's a monk from Mount Hayes. He hasn't done the challenge, but he's one of the monks at the mountain. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And or at the monastery rather. And he was essentially like, I was asking him like what, kind of what the guy was like, and what, like, just like at the very normal mundane things, not how did he train or anything, but like, just kind of what he was like. And he was saying he's just like mostly occupying somewhere else. Like he's mostly somewhere else, like
Hmm.
if you talk to him, he's intelligent and clear out, like he's not like druggy or dopey, but like you can tell he's doing something else somewhere else. And I think they just cultivated a massive spiritual reality. Um, and I think that they choose to reside in that more than this physical world, much in the same way that like from a destruct, like Jonathan Haidt was just released some stuff. He's really consistently talking about juveniles getting lost in like the digital world of their phone, and he released some information charting like the effects on the human brain from the 80s and 90s, which showed like, we had video games, kids played them, very minimal, almost no negative impact on the brain. And then all of a sudden, these like hyper realistic, hyper
Yeah.
specific reality based games. And then immediately it started changing the human brain. I think much like, on the negative side of things, we have people that hide in these false realities. Um, you also, and that blade cuts more than one way. And you could essentially just create a reality built around the spiritual pursuit of knowledge, and, use an overused catch term, enlightenment,
Hmm.
and really just kind of put all of your eggs in that basket, so to speak. And that's my perception.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the big question then becomes is like, are they doing like the meaningful version of like the kids playing The Sims, I guess,
Yeah.
or whatever the
Yeah.
modern
Yeah.
version of that is. And where's the is that sort of like, is there a better payoff for them? Is that sort of like, okay, well, they've accessed some spiritual dimension and they're setting themselves up for some afterlife with that, versus like the person who complacently sits there in some online world and just wastes their life away there, and then there's really no payoff at the end other than just like, okay, now you're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. A bunch of digital tokens. No,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I mean naturally I can't speak to the afterlife part of it,
right.
but my perception is that, I mean, in short, yeah, I think that's probably that's probably the best description I've ever heard of of what they're doing. But the way that I conceptualize it to my mundane brain is like I've since I got sober 6 years ago, I've meditations, just basic mindfulness, like your Sam Harris app and
Hmm.
practice has been my a staple of my routine. And every now and then, like I've had like very clear insights and views, and like same thing when I've done psychedelics in the past, you've had like very clear moments of ego death where you're just like you're viewing this mountain and you see a mountain, you don't see like a mountain through the eyes of a human, like just these small moments and glimpses. And so I conceptualize that it's essentially they're just diving deeper and deeper into a world of that, whether in pursuit of those moments or just living in one endless moment like that, I'm not sure. But
Hmm.
that's what I get. And also it's like, and we get the same thing with what we do. Like, when the high, like there is no higher high from drugs, life, or anything outside of like, maybe the birth of your child or something that you're going to feel than you are when
Yeah.
you hit your 8 mile 89 and you just hit a surge. You know what I mean? Like everything, like your electrolytes, your fuel, everything is lined up, your body's intact, and you just hit a surge and you're like, oh, I'm going to go on a run. Like
Hmm.
the feeling that I had running that an 8:39 hundredth mile at that last 100 mile race, which was my fastest mile of the event, I believe, was just like that. I got to assume it's that and just more.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easy to
And
see.
yeah, it is when you start thinking of it that way. And I think it's also something where you can sort of see how they're able to continue if you put yourself into that scenario where, yeah, think of the most euphoric you've been on during an ultra marathon or a
Yep.
race or an event where you're just in that absolute flow space where you just would like nothing more for it just to continue.
Yep.
It's almost like they get into that state and they're just like, okay, now I got to kind of stay in here.
Yeah.
And they
So,
manage to do it, and that's maybe how they get through the 52-day settings.
To go along with my personalized one-on-one coaching options and my pre-made plans that I have on my website at zachbitter.com, this year I'm starting a group of online endurance runners who want to work with me in a slightly different model. So if you're interested in checking that out, just head to my website at zachbitter.com, go to the coaching tab. From there, you'll be directed to the team coaching option, and you can sign up for that and get onboarded to join the group.
so that's like, and again, I'm aware this could be like the ultra runner child in me, just like creating a fantasy, like the
Yeah.
ultimate ultra runner's fantasy, just live in that loop. But like that is more or less kind of what I see. And I mean, like whatever feedback it is, it's enough to keep them there. It's enough to kill. A lot of guys are willing to die for it.
Hmm.
Like went in
Yeah.
fully eyes open. I saw you when I wrote my first book. I touched on the ultramarathon monks, and at the time, I was consuming everything I could find related to them, and I found an old, and I believe it was a BBC doc, or maybe it was a European documentary on them, and they actually interviewed this guy who had been a office worker and just like walked away. They called him a salary man. He had been a salary man, and
Yeah.
he walked away, and just randomly one day, just he felt unfulfilled and empty, and he just walked away from that life entirely. Shaved his head, became a monk, like a monk disciple or whatever, and worked his way up. And they were like talking to him, and essentially he was just kind of relatable for me in certain strands of this, but he was just saying like he felt essentially like a vessel or like it's a hollow thing, like going through the motions in his old life, like it had no actual deeper meaning, no substance to it. And that's something that I think a lot of people in our world are going to be able to relate to. And
Mhm.
uh, and to be fair, Japan does have a very long history and reputation for like extreme corrections for things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I saw something recently that's like they have a whole subculture of people. It's like there's a name for it and everything, of people who like just decided to like disengage entirely from society. Like they had like failed marriages, debts, or something like that. I thought on Instagram, and then I was reading about it. I was like, but yeah, they essentially just were like, no, we're good. Like walk away, like just become like a ghost society within a society. And I'm like, that's, I mean, dramatic, but like fascinating, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, it's almost like when you think I think the kind of maybe human nature or modern society way of kind of looking at some of the stats for what they're doing, it's easy to maybe think like, well, how are they motivating themselves? How are they like staying, in it and kind of continually going back day after day when it seems like kind of like you were saying before, it's like once you start year four, now you're in it. You're like there's no
yeah,
turning back.
yeah, yeah.
And I wonder how much of it is just we're looking at it the wrong way. I don't suspect these monks are just like David Gogginsing it through this
No, I
4
don't,
years. And to be honest, I doubt that Goggins is either. I think he's
probably
probably
not
getting some sort of like payoff that we're not necessarily associating
for sure.
with what he's doing, where it's like on the surface watching it, it looks an awful lot like punishment. But when you hit that kind of transcendent spot, it becomes rewarding. And then
Yeah,
that rewarding is what's actually motivating to keep coming back. It's almost like the video game dopamine hit. Like on the surface, you could sit there back and watch this kid or adult just waste hours and hours a day playing a video game. Like, how are they staying motivated to do that? How are they staying focused? How are they staying awake? How are they staying alert? And it's like, oh,
yeah,
well, they found a way to digitally tap that dopamine button over and over and
yeah,
over again.
yeah.
And these guys are just doing it kind of, I guess, the natural way.
There is that. And also, like, speaking from my experience, transformation is it's its own like you can reveling in your own transformation is its own thing. Like I assume like Goggins, I imagine that I perceive that to be part of the same thing with him, and not in an unhealthy way or how it's the same thing with me. But it's like watching the old self die and the new self born, whether you're a drug addict or you were a fat guy like Goggins was, or whether
Mhm.
you're a guy who leaves his salary job behind to shave his head and become a monk on a mountain.
Yeah.
I think that there is, and rightfully so, like there's honor for lack of a more modern word, there's honor and a sense of purpose in that that's probably going to be pretty hard to replicate from traditional inputs. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
At least that's I mean, for me, like a lot of times, and maybe that's something that I draw on too. And when it seems like you get to kind of some of the more undesirable, mundane parts of the endurance stuff, like making and breaking a 10 or collecting water when you're doing 50-mile days. Really, you just want to like sit there, put CBD on your feet, and eat a meal of rice and chicken, and be fetal for 4 hours before you move on.
Hmm.
Because for me, honestly, those are the challenging parts for me. It's not generally the output. It's like, oh, I really, really, really don't want to tape each of my toes and then go walk down to that stream and collect and purify this water, and then
Yeah.
bring it back and boil it and cook on my, and then I don't want to break my tent, but it's like those are the moments. If I like the only times I really have to have talks with myself is those moments, and it's not like, hey, keep going. It's nothing motivational. It's like, hey, come on, stop being a child. Like, clean your room, brush your teeth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those like it really is for me. So, so
Uh-huh.
outside of that, I think the transformation alone is its own currency, something to consider.
Yeah, and I think it seems like there's something about the physical breakdown too, and this maybe leads into the fueling side of things with these monks because like with for listeners who are unaware, like they're eating very little, like it's like less than 2,000 calories
It is,
in
yeah,
in a day, and I mean think of 52 miles, like yeah, 52 miles one day on 2,000 calories, you're gonna be
yeah,
fine,
yeah.
but you got to do it 100 days in a row. It's going
100
to
days
cause
in a
some
row.
problems. Um,
Yeah, just a quick overview to my understanding. We're looking at so calories are right in there. I'm not sure if there's any meaningful fluctuation day to day, or if it's like a sit down in the chow hall, have the same exact meal every day. But long story short, they're not. They're eating, a fraction, less than half of what you would advise even like a smaller slider athlete with a pretty efficient metabolism to eat.
mhm.
Additionally, it's all vegetarian. Their
Yeah.
their diet is almost entirely tofu, vegetables, noodles, rice, and then the one saving grace that's got to make a huge difference is the milk. They do consume a good amount of milk,
Hmm.
um, which is from like a amino profiling perspective, and like just like the milk's got to be huge. I'm a huge milk drinker. It's one of the main things I drink when I run ultras: milk and
Hmm.
ginger ale. Um, but the like outside of that, like I said, it's not it's not a lot. Like I'm, and this isn't this isn't you know, like we're not just spitballing here. Like there's, you can go online. I remember when I was doing my initial research, I watched the meals. I watched them eating meals, and it's like you know, a bowl of tofu soup, like you know, like some things here, some things there, and it's not what I would. I mean, it's less than, you know, like their entire day is probably about a pretty solid meal for me, honestly.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, that's what I was thinking too. When I saw the list of what they were eating, I was like, well, yeah, that's one meal.
Yeah.
And
No,
not even an insane training day either. Like
no,
pretty
no,
typical
no,
one. So like,
no.
yeah, it's
Seriously. You can. I mean,
yeah,
for anyone interested, you can go on YouTube, type this in. You know, just pull up. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It's been a few years, but there's the main old school documentary on it. You can watch them at mealtime, and you're like, oh my god, that's. I mean, it's, you
yeah.
know, it looks like a pretty balanced, nutritious meal, to be fair, but like, you know, from a vegetarian perspective.
Hmm.
But like, not like you said, that's an entire day of eating. You know, like that's a solid meal. Yeah, maybe a post run meal on a run day.
Yeah.
You know.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And so that makes me think like, what is there? Because I mean, obviously they're breaking down tissue, like their body's breaking down, they're losing weight during these things. And some of it almost feels like I'd be curious what they're doing actually on the non-running sections. Because if you think about this, like year one is 100 days,
Yeah.
19 miles. Well,
Right.
there is 265 other days there. So to
Yeah.
some degree, I'd love to see like a look at like what are they must be gaining some weight back and sort of almost like setting themselves up
Yeah.
to be ready for the next year to some degree. I can't imagine they're eating a ton of food if they're only getting what they're getting on active days, but it's going to be a little bit different at least. But yeah, it makes me think about like the physical breakdown where there's almost this like opposite reaction on the like mental, spiritual side of things where
Yeah.
it's like the more broken down you get, the more you're transcending and how much of that has to play into it where there's the physical breakdown of actually doing what they're doing, but also their body breaking down from just not actually getting enough food to necessarily fuel the activities that they're producing.
Yeah, so I do think that's why they schedule it the way they do too. It's like I don't think these guys have any shyness away from like mental challenge, but I think it's like you do 100 days of this year, 100 days of this year to give your body that time to not just heal, but also to like to super compensate and
Hmm.
adapt. And I think honestly, the best parallel to look at from the nutritional standpoint would be like your faster paced PCT hikers maybe,
Hmm.
and you see them, you know what I mean, do it like someone who does the PCT in 100 miles, like that'd be a pretty good, or 100 days rather, would be a pretty good parallel to look at. Of course, being a piece of PCT trash myself, I can tell you that we stop at every town along the way and we eat hamburgers made from donuts, and we eat literally like ice cream floats and like a lot. So it's there is
Yeah.
that, but it would be essentially like go do the PCT in 100 days and eat 1,800 calories of vegetarian diet and nothing else along the way. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And no
Yeah.
cheat meals, because it's not like they're hitting 7-Eleven up every time they want like that ho ho Slurpee combo that gets you through mile 36, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I think that would kind of be a way to look at it. And to be fair, like at different points I've been on the PCT, I have seen like, I saw this one kid, he was a Eastern European college kid from Slovakia who was like, for a day and a half. He was hiking and he was like in my rear view mirror for like a day and a half somehow. And I don't know how. I never saw him run a single step. And I think he was just mostly doing it off ramen packets, because we saw when I first met him at a, no, seriously, when I first met him at a watering hole, he was just there like little, like literally this little camp making a ramen packet. And I'm like filling up water bottles and mixing scratch
Yeah.
recovery and, you know, like all, you know, all these different things. Uh, and yeah, and he, like, I think it wasn't until like the next afternoon when I finally like would like peek over my head and he wasn't there anymore. And so I was like,
Yeah.
I think the fit, like there's got like most of these guys are going to be physically not huge human beings. You know, most Japanese, for the, you know, the average Japanese man is going to be smaller than the average American man. They're also essentially, I mean, at some form or another, you got to assume the physiological adaptations to a low calorie existence have already started, you know, just being
Hmm.
basic monks. Like, you know what I mean? The second they get there, that's got to start. So it's not like you and me are eating steak one night and then they expect us to go do, you know what I mean? 100,
Hmm.
115, 100, 170 Ks back to back to back and on, you know, minimal vegetarian calories. So you got to consider that, they're not
Hmm.
bodybuilders. They're smaller guys. They're metabolically adapted to the low calorie existence before you get the inputs of the massive mileage. The mileage itself is lower intensity. It's consistent. You get the time, but you get the next 200, 265 days of the year as recovery days in essence. What I do wonder, I mean, like all of that, it's insane, but it's physiologically possible in my brain. What I wonder about is how are you doing this without strength conditioning? Like how are your joints staying together? How are
Hmm.
you standing? And just forget running or walk. How are you stand that long without your lower back just like what I mean?
Hmm.
And how are you doing it in rope sandals?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, it
So I
makes you
am curious about
wonder
that.
because I know when you look at kind of their routine, and I was kind of referencing this kind of in the beginning too, it's like they're not just sort of rinsing and repeating the hiking side of things. They're doing like temple chores
Yep.
and they're going to
Yep.
services. I imagine the services aren't anything physically demanding, but the temple chores might be. So maybe they're getting a little
Yep.
bit of strength and conditioning through that. But yeah, I wonder the same thing too, because when your body's breaking down like that, yeah, being strong going into it or having a strength program is gonna just, I mean, you don't have to look any further than the protein requirements for somebody who's doing resistance training versus the protein requirements for someone who isn't in terms of
Yep.
preserving lean body mass with weight loss. And it's like it's pretty
Yep.
impressive to the degree where the resistance training is probably more important than the protein to a degree. Or
Yep.
maybe another way to look at it, you can get low end of the requirement of protein if you interject with resistance training and a calorie deficit versus optimal protein calorie deficit, no resistance training. You want the resistance
Right.
training
Right.
lever just as much as you do the high protein. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it makes you wonder how they're doing that.
It is. I mean, it's not uncommon. Like, monasteries throughout Asia and China, even in, India, look at yoga, are known for, frequently having like a mobility discipline of some sort. Maybe,
Hmm.
maybe not. I'm sure they don't call it that, but like, these physically meditative positions and, stretches and stuff. I just don't know.
Hmm.
I would love to, though. I'd love to see what they're doing that's keeping their body together through that, especially as like touching on the protein, like and physical degradation, like a normal person needs this much protein. A person resistance training needs this much, but a person with high volume endurance training who wants to maintain muscle needs more than either one of them. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so it's like it's fascinating, and I definitely will take the opportunity if I get a chance to go visit or to
Yeah.
interview one for sure because just you got to. There's so many things I would be curious about the physical stuff, but that'd probably represent 20 to 30% of my questions. Like, I'd say
Hmm.
the lion's share would go into just like what is going on in your head during this situation and this
Right.
situation, and how long after 9 days of no food with very minimal water to the point where you're so weak you can barely make it to a well. Are you recovered well? Like how long after that are you recovered? What's that recovery cycle like? What's your physiological what are your bio patterns like throughout the year? Like, in the
Hmm.
100 versus the 265 versus, what I mean? Like, just anyway, so
Hmm.
many things, but most of them would honestly be mindset related.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest hurdle with having like just say a reporter go over there because the one thing I found interesting as I was like looking into some stuff there's just like you were saying in the beginning there's not a lot of information and the I mean there's a decent amount of information but a lot of it's repetitive so you sort of like you can watch or read like 10 different things and you sort of get the same
Same thing.
information
Yeah.
10 times and I wonder like there's just so much stuff here where there may be a fairly big disconnect between communication where they're actually able to tell you what they're experiencing because like how many of us have a reference point that they would actually be able to connect what they're telling us to in the first place. So sometimes I wonder if that's the biggest bottleneck for like some of these big organizations that would maybe make a story out of this is like how do we actually connect the 99% of the people we want to reach with this that are going to have zero experiences in life that can actually relate to what this person's talking about.
I was gonna say it's different to have Barbara Walters tell that story than Dean Karnassus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like, he could go, like you said, like context is everything. The
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you can guarantee there's some disconnect for sure. Just because, I mean, there's a pretty large baseline disconnect between Japanese and American people in general. And having not that I'm an expert in it, but having grown up in a Japanese American house, like I can tell you that much for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's pretty mind-boggling to me to think just like everything that kind of goes into this, and some of it I think is just like, yeah, lifestyle differences is, you have a different connection point to just existence, and unless you were like growing up in that one. Although I mean, you're talking about, I watched that video of the guy who kind of just like totally like abandoned
Yeah.
his office job and then went into this. But even then, I think you're what you said before about maybe even just like cultural differences between Japan and the United States is, you do have that very kind of more regimental, kind of orderly design around things too, that may feed into something like this a little bit better, even if you're coming off of a more modernized version of Japan.
It is, and yeah, yeah. Just to be clear, I make that reference because my perception, limited as it is that we're dealing with a very rare ancient strain of Japanese thinking, But
Yeah.
there's a continuity of that, obviously, in the modern culture, which just honestly it fascinates me. Everything from Kaizen mindset to Ikigai, the process for finding your purpose in life, which is essentially to identify what you're good at, identify what you enjoy doing, identify what the world needs, and identify one other point. Basically, you look at where they all, essentially you fill each circle up with definitions and see where they overlap. I love stuff like that, and I love simplified, like you said, regimental processes for things, especially when they're highly efficient and productivity oriented. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so and long story short, I think that it. I mean, cliches aside, it's just I think they're that committed. I think that they are getting feedback, a positive feedback off of this. I mean, how could you not? I mean, it's
Mhm.
epic, and I've always personally myself been drawn to like acts of absolute commitment to a thing, and it's probably because I'm incapable of that myself. Like I find 4 or 5 different things interesting, and I want to I want to
Yeah.
adapt. I do them all at one time a little bit, but like when I look at someone, like did you ever get into like martial arts at any point?
I didn't know.
So it's like you using jujitsu guys specifically. Like there's a few of like the older school guys, like from Brazil, who like lived very much like monkish sort of existences, and
Hmm.
they specifically would like focus on one aspect of the game. Like they'd be proficient everywhere, obviously, but they would focus on one aspect of the game and just become like a hyper specific expert in it, and just this one, the guard play or the guard pass from this, just whatever it was.
Hmm.
And so you would see these guys kind of like in like an almost Jiro loves sushi sort of way, like dedicate a 40-year jujitsu career to like one exact thing. And I always thought, like, whenever I saw that, I would think two things. The first is like, that is fascinating. And the second is like, oh my God, I can never get me out of here. I can't even think about this. But just all the energy drains from my body. I'm like, oh my God. But I
Hmm.
think it's amazing. And I think that's what it is. But I'm also curious, like, what's recruitment like these days? What's recruitment? What's happened to recruitment over the last 100 years?
Yeah.
Can be, got to be harder and harder to find guys that are willing to do that, right?
No
Even just
doubt.
live that life. Yeah.
Hmm. I think they were referencing that on one of the documentaries I watched, where it was like they were sort of like alluding to like, is this the end? Is this the last one? Kind of type of a messaging there, because yeah, you just don't have a huge drive to go to that. I mean, it's just so far removed from the starting point. You probably almost need like a series of things getting bad enough where you get more people like that last guy who completed it that you were talking about, where he quit his job and went in and just was like, all right, this has got to be better. There's got I don't care how miserable this looks from a modern standpoint, there's got to be better. And then I'm gonna figure that out one way or the other, and they dives in. But
Yeah.
it makes me wonder too, kind of like what you're saying about that narrow focus of just like, I'm just gonna master this one thing. And I think we'll probably get into this with some of the other topics we do on future episode for some of these ancient endurance
Right.
societies. Is when I think about it is like, I mean, we're so far removed. You're actually probably can appreciate this better than I can, because you've actually do things like go out and backcountry hunt and stuff like that. But like, when you take someone who's lived in a city their whole life and they don't do any of that stuff, like the idea for them to like go out and survive off the land is just such a far disconnect. Like they're not even going to last a day.
Right.
But you take someone who's born in that and lives in it, and it's like, yeah, it's harsh, it's difficult, but you're really focused on just a handful of things. Like
Love
you're
that.
focused on water, food acquisition, shelter, and then
Yeah.
anything that's left over, some like relationship type stuff. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's not like, oh, did I pay the gas bill? Oh, wait, we got to take the car to the auto shop. Oh, the kids get
Yep.
picked up at three. All of that, like thousands of little things that just like nick at you
Yep.
constantly, but are trivial to do. There's very easy to do any one of them, but there's just millions of them in our modern society. You get all of that out of there, and you're just kind of like you're focusing on like these your survival essentially.
Yep.
And
No,
and I wonder,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you summed that up really well. And it just as you were talking about, I was like, God, my wife's a saint because I disappear and I was just like sometimes on hours notice, just into the mountains and back and sleeper with dogs and family issue, all the things. And so yeah, I had a marital gratitude moment there when you were talking about that. But no, you're right, man. It is that the same thing. I mean, we experience the same thing as endurance athletes too. It's like just that constant check loop of where's my fueling at,
Mhm,
where are my injuries at, where's my stride at, where's my breathing at. Repeat.
mhm. Yep.
When's the what do I need to top off at the next aid station? What let me mentally rehearse real quick what I'm going to do when I'm up in there. Go through it once. All right, cool. And then your brain just repeats that simple, beautiful, peaceful, quiet loop indefinitely.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the same thing: food, water, shelter, repeat. And then the thing I like about it though is when I find myself getting excited over little things, like I could 3 or 4 days in, I could whoop for joy if I find a really good campsite. Like
Yeah.
I'm a quiet person, like actually a quiet person, and I could just be just like literally whoop for joy because I found like a campsite that has boulder shelter on one side, no widowmaker trees that might fall, like water just down the hill, like no, all these things and a nice view. And I'm just like, oh my God, the decaf coffee or the hot chocolate I drink tonight in my little gas heated mug is just going to be awesome. And like once
The
I,
appreciation.
yep. And so, they say gratitude, everything comes back to gratitude. And, as a guy who's, uh, probably more than one time over shouldn't be here right now. I'm forced to agree with that because it's those are the moments I think when we're most present,
Hmm.
and I think that just ultra running alone really creates a fertile ground to kind of experience those and connect with those. And we're not even doing shrine visits and
Yeah.
meditative retreats and all the crazy fasting stuff. So again, bringing it back to them, I think they're just getting a bigger dose. They're getting the bigger, less diluted dose of what we're getting, and they've
Hmm.
just built an existence around it. It's crazy that someone figured that out, 900 years ago too. They're just
Hmm.
like, nah, we're just gonna do. You guys go fight for kingdoms and
Yeah.
do your thing. We'll just be over here. We're just gonna do some laps like forever.
Yeah. Yeah. It has to be. It has to be better than this. It
Yeah,
can't be
yeah,
just
yeah.
warfare and invading and all that.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Society kind of goes through those sort of cycles to some degree, and then different. The world is big enough where, yeah, it's all happening at the same time somewhere.
Yeah, I guess I couldn't really criticize that given the fact my earliest chance I moved to a small the house in a small mountain area, and then literally I just do 8 mile loops around a mountain lake all day long, and that's pretty much my life outside of writing the occasional book and filming the occasional social media stuff down at Mark Bell's Super Training or wherever I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm unrelated, but I saw I was getting caught up on some of your podcast episodes. And I was, or maybe this was social media. Anyway, I saw one of your strength and conditioning routines lately or recently, dude. I was like, dude, Zach's a beast, dude. Like a weight room beast. I was like, serious, like seriously. I was like, that's like, I lift a decent amount of weight through a lot of GPP, and I was like, that'd be a workout for me to get through. Damn.
Yeah, I've really gotten, actually my strength work for me has been an interesting component because I got into it actually in kind of high school. I was all like it took me a little bit of an evolution to really go all in on running. So, I was pretty typical as a kid where it was like, oh, you know what? It's probably cooler to be strong than it is to be weak. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
like doing strength work and then alongside cross country and stuff like that was something I kind of picked up on. I remember like my sophomore year in high
good.
school. And then I kind of stepped away from it a little bit here and there as I took running a little more seriously. But then my freshman year of college, or actually no, it was my sophomore year of college, I was injured for the entirety of the indoor and outdoor track season. It was
Yeah.
Achilles tendonitis, so I couldn't do any running. And even the bike was aggravating it, so I couldn't do that either. So I
It
just
sucks,
went in the
dude.
weight room and would just strength train and stuff. And I actually got my I haven't talked about this too much, but like I got my bench press up to like two I did 235 pounds.
Woo-wee.
Um and I was only 140 pounds too. So it
No,
was like
that's a
a
legit
pretty,
bench press. You were hitting
yeah,
two
yeah.
plates at that size. That's legit.
I actually remember one day I was in, so one of my cross country and track teammates, he was working in the gym as one of his like kind of jobs during college, and I hadn't been at practice in a meaningful way in weeks. It was actually getting close to being able to return to running. So I'm in there working out and he's in there, it's just kind of quiet. And I think I put like 185 pounds on the bench press, and I was doing like reps of like, I think I was doing reps of 5 or 6 or something at the time. And he sees me put it on there and he's like, this is just a bad situation, because he's thinking of me as just like this runner friend that he's had. He's like,
That's
so he
dope.
comes over there. He's nice about it. He's like, hey, man, you want me to spot you? I'm like, sure, spot me. And then I rep it out and he's just like, dude, how did you do that?
I like that.
Um, but I did I got into bench pressing from probably more aesthetic reasons than anything in high school, as kind of like one of the
Yeah.
things I would just kind of do a little more consistently. And I bought like a used bench press from a buddy and would do that consistently enough to kind of maintain a decent amount of strength with it. So then when I got injured from running, it wasn't too big of a bar to get up to that. But yeah, so back to the original thing, like I've definitely kind of ebbed and flowed in how seriously I took strength training over my more professional running career. But I'm 38 now, and I've had enough injuries in the last few years compared to like what was relatively an injury-free career up until that point, for the
Right.
most part, other than a couple issues, that Achilles tendon one for being one of them. That like strength work is just a non-negotiable for me now. Like it is as important, where when I was in my like mid 20s, early 30s, it'd be like, you know what, I really don't feel like doing strength work. I'm just gonna go for an extra run. Now it's like, no, 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 no. If the strength work is on the program, that's
Yeah.
getting done. And if you still feel like going for a run after that, maybe question it, but you're getting the strength work in first. So I've put a lot of attention into that the last couple of years.
Yeah, I enjoy running obviously more than lifting. I like being strong. I can lift a decent amount of weight. But I like, to me, yeah, just being out on the trail, like an unstructured run to me is the apex of exercise, like essentially.
Mhm.
I love, like I like the martial arts stuff. I like lifting. I like different types of lifting. I like, doing all this stuff. But yeah, it just like a couple snacks in my pocket, good bottle on my hand, you know what I mean? A good
So
vest,
simple.
and
Hmm.
yeah, and just put, like a good trail, and somewhere beautiful, and that I really don't care.
Hmm.
Like nothing else is going to match that for me. But got to lift. The second I get done with this call, I got to go boat and then come back and lift. Do legs tonight. So it's like, it is
Yeah.
what it is. But I'm pretty good. I
Well,
keep my volume pretty low. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, I probably should let you go here pretty soon, because I know
Oh
I've
yeah, yeah,
we've,
yeah, yeah.
we've been going for a while, but it's been fun to.
No, yeah.
I kind of like
Oh yeah,
the format of chatting about a variety of stuff on top of kind of the main
yeah,
topic.
yeah. Well, these things, like, no, these things, they branch out in organic conversation, but also it's like it's not so, not fun to be regimented. I tend to kind of approach everything with a more informal view. I kind of my guys tell me I'm kind of, I guess, the opposite of like your David Goggins type, but like I think that, like, if you're gonna do a hard thing, it's generally better to do it with a smile and some informal banter. And like, I probably wouldn't be a great politician or something like that, but it's like, why not? So you and me are buddies. Might as well just chat. Let everyone, we talk about interesting stuff. Let everyone else, get in on it.
Yeah,
We'll occasionally steer it where we want to, but I thought we did a good job of addressing the marathon monks. I don't think I missed anything either that I intended to get to.
yeah. No, I was glad you shared kind of some of that intro stuff. That was really interesting. I hadn't gotten nearly that in depth with kind of just the surrounding areas or anything when I was looking into it. So I
It was a
found that
trip.
fun to hear. Cool.
Yeah, I'll try to get into it. I mean, on the off chance that there's a person somewhere somewhere in this wide world that's actually interested in hearing more about that. I'll try to learn more and get into it in the next book. I'm trying to get my book out by Christmas or so, but and that I guess that plug. I'm working on a book
Yeah,
about the history of warrior training. Spoiler alert: running is pretty much the main way warriors trained. They did the
right
strength
on.
stuff. They did this. Some of them, like the Vikings and the Maori, did like rowing as opposed to running because they were maritime people. But always comes back to the runnings. You can't fight someone if you can't get there and get away if things go wrong.
Hmm. I
But
love
yeah,
it.
yeah, brother.
And the book's December, you said?
Yeah, looking at December, it's literally just called Preparing for War, How the Greatest Warriors in History Trained. It's aiming to be like 100 pages, highly consumable, so anyone can pick it up or put it down. Um, but yeah, I keep just coming up, it's the Apache, it's the Navajo this time, it's the Thon Bushman, it's the Rara Murray, who I believe we're gonna get to pretty soon too. Like
Yeah.
it just always comes back to running, you know.
Hmm. Right on. Well, that's cool. Well, hopefully the listeners will get on that book and get themselves a Christmas present.
That sounds good. It'd be a good one. It will not disappoint.
Where else can people find you, James? I know you've got other resources out there.
Oh yeah, I'm on the normal ones. Do most of my stuff on Instagram. Have a YouTube channel now that's grown pretty good, and we do have a decent amount of running content on there, both historical breakdowns and conversations with my runners and the things that I've done. There's the documentary from my run across the hottest desert on earth in spring, Sonora, and if any of the stuff we talked about today sounds interesting, find me on anywhere on social media. You'll probably find more of what you like.
Cool. And it's all wild hunt conditioning.
All wild hunt conditioning.
Right on. Well, I'll definitely link that in the show notes too, so people can
Oh,
click
cool thing.
over easily.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, James. Well, I'll let you get to that strength session and voting and
Will do.
everything that goes into the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
Take care.
Here are some discounts and promos for HPO sponsors. Also, just a reminder, I have a full breakdown of how I use each of these products at the end of the episode, so stick around to hear that if interested. Otherwise, head over to the websites. S Fuels, if you're interested in right fuel at right time approach, check out their second generation products that just launched. For a limited time, you can get 40% off their entire catalog for their Black Friday special. Just use promo code ZAC40. Head over to sfuelsgolonger.com. Janji Apparel has 10% off with promo code BITTER10. Janji makes some great training apparel. I use it in the gym and on runs. You also have a really cool product I've been using a lot lately, which is their multi-pass mini and sling bag. I would definitely recommend checking those out. Element Electrolytes has a free sample pack with a purchase of their product and a satisfaction guarantee, which just means if you don't like it, you get your money back, no questions asked. You don't even have to return the product. They also just launched a new product called Sparkle, which is a 16-ounce carbonated can with the element flavors in it. This one's great. I've been using it in my long runs recently. Delta G Ketones has 20% off with promo code BITTER20, and they also offer a free consultation to help you better understand how their product would maybe fit your lifestyle and figure out what protocol would be best with that. So head over to deltagketones.com to check out their products and access that discount.